لا نقصد الأسئلة ماني شايفها، ما أدري فين الفيدباك صراحة.
طيب ممكن ناخذها هذه بالأوفيس أور.
أوكي أبشر.
طيب بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه وله. I'd like to welcome you all to this first lecture of week 12 of ICS 104. طيب any questions before we proceed? طبعا by now الحمد لله we are done with the Python with the Python part. Inshallah we will start our overview of the C language today بإذن الله. Any questions?
Yeah, Doctor.
نعم.
Do you know anything about the final exam? No.
Do I know anything about what?
Final exam.
You haven't received anything yet?
No, don't receive anything.
Well, I think you will inshallah.
Okay. Thank you.
طيب. Okay, so let me first bring this here. Let me start first sharing the screen. Where it is. Okay. So let me share the screen.
طفي الكاميرا يا أحمد النيفة نافي.
لا ليش يطفي؟ خليها شغالة.
ما أدري والله.
أنا ماني شايف حدا مشغل يعني. بالعكس ترى يا شباب بسعدني إني أشوفكم عشان ما أكون يعني.
أنا فكرت بالغلط يا دكتور معلش.
لا أنا قصدي يعني
منك دكتور.
ترى كويس أشوفكم يعني.
لا مو أنا كنت توني شايله من شحن فما لاحظت إني شغلته.
أوكي. طيب فبس as I told you يعني I don't mind seeing you. Do you see the slides?
Yes, Doctor.
Yes, Doctor.
تمام. Okay. طيب. So the reading assignment 4 chapters. Don't worry. Don't panic. In fact, what we did was we took Python. We learned the basics. So now we will see another language. We will not spend much time in explaining concepts that we have already, experienced in Python. We will try to, emphasize on things that we have not seen in Python. Okay. Don't panic, when you see 4 chapters in front of you. So basically, chapter 2, sections 1 through 6, chapter 3, section 1, chapter 4, sections 1 to 4 and 7, and chapter 5, sections 1 to 8. But as I said, don't panic. Okay. Right. So what are we going to learn in these 2 weeks? Well, after going through these chapters, it's expected that you become familiar with the general form of a C program and the basic elements in a program. Inshallah, we will do that starting from today. You'll understand the use of data types and the differences between the data types in double and character. You will learn how C evaluates arithmetic expressions and how to write them in the C language. You will develop C code using control structures, conditions, rational and logical operators. And finally, you will develop C code using the while for and the do while loop. Now, let me ask you the following. In this learning outcomes, is there any term that you have not seen before?
Double.
Well, you have seen it as a float. Okay, anything else? Character? Well, you know what's a character, and we will later know what's a character. But other than these two, anything
Do while.
different? While?
Do while.
Do while. Okay, so do while is something different, and inshallah we will see it. But as far as the overall, most of the concepts are already known to you. Most of the concepts are already known to you. Okay, right. So why do we need to learn C? Well, many companies and software projects still do their programming in the C language, although the C language is kind of old. It's maybe one of the oldest, high-level languages. C produces optimized programs that run fast. Remember, Python was one of the motivations for development of Python. Efficiency? No. Efficiency was not in the minds of the developers of Python. Simplicity was in the minds of the developers of Python, but not efficiency. Okay, but not efficiency. Here, efficiency is important. Okay, low-level access to computer memory via pointers. In fact, the C language is very good at accessing low-level computer memory, and that's why the C language is actually used even to develop operating systems. Is used to develop operating systems, right? Not only high-level languages or not only high-level applications. Of course, it can be compiled to run on a variety of computers. So let's first agree on what are we going to use in order to run C code. Well, when we developed this course, we thought that you have learned one quote unquote IDE, which is the Jupyter notebook and basically the Jupyter suite to develop Python code. We didn't want to enforce another IDE, quote unquote IDE, for you to do C. So that's why we resort to using the online C compiler. And if you go to the online C compiler, you can see that you can immediately write code and then run it by pressing the run button there or pressing the F9. Okay.
Doctor?
You can see the compiler, huh?
Yes.
Yes.
Doctor,
Now,
can you share the link of that website in the chat so that we can...
Oh, right now you mean?
Yeah,
Right.
if we would like to run a code.
Okay. So...
But Doctor, why not use Clang? It's not that complicated, and it will run faster on our own machine.
What did you say? What is it?
Why not use Clang? C language compiler. Yeah.
What is that?
It converts the C code to machine code, so you can run it on your own machine. I think it will convert it to x86 code.
It's called CLang, C-L-A-N-G.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, this is the
It's
first time I
available
hear.
on Linux, Mac OS, and I believe also on Windows on WSL2.
Right. So let me. I will investigate it. Of course, we cannot do any changes maybe in this semester, but this is the first time I hear about CLang, so I took note of it. Okay.
Thank you.
Doctor?
Now,
Do PyCharm run C codes?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Okay. Right. Okay. So so this is kind of the structure of a complete C program. Okay. This is kind of an example of a C program. This is a C program that converts miles to kilometers. Okay, it basically gets an input from the user as miles and converts the miles into kilometers and then displays the amount in kilometers, right? So you will see that we will see, for example, the comments. How do we specify comments? We will see the preprocessor directives. We will see the main function. It is similar and different to the main function that we have developed in Python. And of course, you are familiar with the return. We will see how do we do reading, and we will see how do we do displaying the output. Okay, so let's go into that directly. Now let me just to show you how does this run. So Control C. Let me go to the online compiler. Control A, Control V. So this is basically the code. So if I press F9, and here you see enter the distance in miles. So if I put the distance 1 mile, it should give me 1.6. It should give me 1.609 kilometers because 1 mile is 1.609. Okay. So as you can see, the online compiler is very easy, and basically you just type the code F9. There you go. You will get the output. Okay. Right. So let us continue then. So let's start with the first thing that we have seen in that program, which is the preprocessor directives and the main function. Okay. Now the preprocessor directives are commands that give instructions to the C preprocessor, whose job is to modify the text of a C program before it is compiled. Whose job is to modify the text of a C program before it's compiled. That's why it's called, preprocessor directives. Preprocessor. So it's pre-processing. Okay, it's pre-processing. A preprocessor directive begins with a hash symbol or the pound symbol, right, as its first non-blank character. The two most common directives appearing in the previous figure are the hash include and the hash define. The hash include and the hash define. So what is this hash include and the hash define? Well, the C language explicitly defines only a small number of operations or statements. Many actions that are necessary in a computer program are not defined directly by the C language. Instead, every C implementation contains collections of useful functions and symbols called libraries. The ANSI standard, the American National Standards Institute for C, requires that certain standard libraries be provided in every ANSI C implementation. In every ANSI C implementation, you have to have those standard libraries. Okay. Now, a C system may expand the number of operations available by supplying additional libraries, which are basically quote-unquote user-defined libraries. An individual programmer can also create, libraries of functions. Each library has a standard header file whose name ends with the symbols .h. Okay, so the header, ends with .h. Of course, we will not go into details what the header file and what does it contain. We will not go into that much detail. Okay, so the hash include directive gives a program access to a library. Do you remember what something similar to it that we did in Python?
From
import.
صح? Import whatever from whatever, صح?
Yes.
Import whatever from whatever. So this is kind of very similar. And just like Python provides, a standard set of libraries that you can import, similarly, C does that, okay, using the hash include. So this directive causes the preprocessor to insert definitions from a standard header file into a program before compilation. For example, the directive hash include stdio. By the way, stdio stands for standard input/output. Standard input/output. That's why you see here print and scan. Scanf is, similar to input, but it's actually very different. Okay, it's very different. But this is how we read and write from the user. Okay, standard stdio.h. So this directive hash include stdio.h notifies the preprocessor that some names used in the program, such as scanf and printf, are found in the standard header file stdio.h. Are found in the standard header file stdio.h. Right. So this is the objective of hash include. So hash include will include some libraries for us, to use with our C programs. Right. Now, what about the other preprocessor directive, the hash define? Well, the hash define associates the constant macro KMS per mile with the meaning 1.609. Now, so basically this directive instructs the preprocessor, and be careful of this, instructs the preprocessor to do what? To replace each occurrence of KMS per mile in the text of the C program by 1.609. And this is actually done before compilation begins. This is actually done before compilation begins. Okay, so what do you think is this? So this is similar to what in Python?
Assignment statement.
لا ليش assignment
functions.
ولا functions.
input constant.
هي طلعوا يا شباب مكتوب كلياته in all caps. صح؟ It's kind of a constant. But it is different. See, in Python, do we have a specific data type called constant?
No, we define a variable but never change it. As in here, if you define it as a constant, you can't change. You cannot change.
You cannot change. You cannot change. In fact, before compilation begins, all occurrences of KMS per mile will be removed from the text of your source code and will be replaced with 1.609. So this is one difference from Python. In Python, a constant you can change it because it's a variable. The Python compiler does not, enforce, not being able to change that value. But here, by nature, you cannot change it. By nature, you cannot change it. Okay?
Doctor?
No.
So is the concept of variables are also included in C?
Say that again.
The concept of variables, is it also in C language or not?
Yes, yes, of course. I mean, just wait. So, this is the general syntax, for some of the preprocessor directives, like for example, hash include stdio.h, hash include math.h. What do you think math.h will contain?
Square root.
Numbers and
Something
math
like that,
functions.
square root, sine, cosine, functions related to math. Basically, functions related to math. Okay, and then we have the other one, which is hash define name value. This will basically define constant. As you can see, the constant can be a floating point value. It can also be an integer, right? It can also be an integer. Right. Okay, so now let's come to function main. Now, function main marks the beginning of the main function where the program execution begins. Now, every C program has a main function. Does that hold in Python?
No.
No. In Python, we, defined main, and it's good practice to have a main function. Right? It's good practice to have a main function. You should not, have your code scattered in the program. No, define, functions and have a main. Again, convention, not enforced. In C, that's a totally different game. It has to be there. Main has to be there. So every C program has a main function. Right. Now, how did we define the block of a function in Python?
Using def.
Def is the header of the function. I said the body of the function in Python. How did we define it?
Indentation.
Indentation. We use indentation to define the body of the function. Well, in C, there is no indentation. Okay, there is no concept of indentation at all. So how does C, identify a block of statements? Well, it identifies a block of statements by using the curly bracket, the open curly bracket, and the closed curly bracket, just like here. Okay, so when you have main void, we will see what's that in a few minutes, and then you say open curly bracket. Now, whatever is in between those two brackets belongs to the body of main. Okay, right. So a function body has two parts. Basically has declarations, which tells the compiler what memory cells are needed in the function, and contains executable statements. And we are going to see that for the first time, these declarations, right? And these declarations are actually the ones that will define our variables. So the function body will contain declarations followed by executable statements, which are derived from the algorithm, are translated into machine language and later executed by the computer. So in the structure of the C program, execution always starts from the main function. And it will go to the body, and the body will basically contain usually, a set of declarations, followed by the executable statements. Okay, right. Right, reserved words. Well, just like Python has reserved words, we also have reserved words in C. A word that has a special meaning to C and cannot be used for other purposes. Okay, these are words that C reserves for its own use. For example, the built-in data types like int, double, character, char, void, etc. All these are reserved words. We cannot use them. For example, in variable names. And then the ones related to control flow, like the if, the else, for, while, return. You cannot use any of these as a variable name. Okay, as a variable name. And you can see that they are always lowercase. The reserved words are always lower case. Right. Now let's come to standard identifiers. Well, standard identifier is a word having a special meaning, but one that a programmer may redefine. But one that a programmer may redefine. Okay. However, the redefinition is definitely not recommended. The redefinition is definitely not recommended. For example, printf and scanf. In fact, we use printf and scanf to read and write. So it really doesn't make sense to, to override them. It doesn't make sense to override them. So if you define your own printf, then you will not be able to use the C library function, printf. You cannot use the C library function printf. So these are what we call standard identifiers. These are the identifiers that are provided by the standard libraries. Okay, that are identified by the standard library. Right. Now let us come to user-defined identifiers. Now, as far as user-defined identifiers, well, we choose our own identifiers to name memory cells that will hold data and program results. Do you remember what did we call these memory cells? What did we call these memory cells? Variables. Okay, we're going to use them for variables. And we're going to use them to name functions that we define. We're going to use them, the user-defined identifiers, to name functions. Just like, in Python, we have user-defined functions. Okay? Right. Now, what are the rules for naming identifiers? Now, of course, I don't have to, give you examples and go over. All this we have already done in Python. So now, if I just tell you the rules, I hope that you should be able to, imagine or, comprehend, the variable naming convention or the variable naming rules. So, for example, an identifier consists only of letters, digits, and underscores. Is this similar or different from Python?
Similar.
This is similar. This is exact, صح? This is
Yes.
exact. طيب. An identifier cannot begin with a digit. ايش رايكم؟
It's a shape.
Yes.
Exactly the same. صح? Exactly the same. A C reserved word cannot be used as an identifier.
Also the same.
A standard C identifier should not be redefined. Maybe we did not say that when we talked about Python variable names, but by the way, it also applies. By the way, it also applies. So the variable naming rules are exactly the same as Python. Okay, are exactly the same as Python. So I hope that by doing this and by always reminding you of what we have done in Python, you should not feel intimidated that this is the first programming course and you are basically taking two different programming languages. Well, yes, there are two different programming languages, but hopefully with the tools and the skills that you have developed in Python, you should be able to very quickly build your skills using the C language. Right. So examples of valid identifiers like letter 1, inches, kilometer per mile, right? And invalid identifiers. Well, why is this invalid?
Start with a digit.
Why is this invalid?
Symbols.
Symbol. There's a symbol, the dollar sign. Why is this invalid?
A reserved word.
Reserved.
It's a reserved word. It's a reserved word. Okay, Shabab? Any question? طيب.
Doctor, I have a question.
تفضل.
The character, the CHAR.
The character, the CHAR, ماله.
What does it do?
What does it do? طب ايش رايك نستنى عليها لحد ما نشوفها.
اوكي.
Okay. Right. Okay. So let's take our first hello world example. Just like we had our hello world example in Python, let's have our hello world example in C. Now, do you see our hello world? Do you remember the hello world in Python? How many lines of code did we write?
One line.
One line. Huh? One line. So this is the first, the first thing that you will notice. From one line, now we have 1, 2, 3. Well, let's say at least we have 3 lines. Okay, at least we have 3 lines. So this is for defining the printf, because I'm going to use the printf. This is int main, and as we said, every C program has a main function, and execution actually starts from the main function. And then finally, I have a printf and then hello world. And as you might guess, well, this is basically a string. Okay, this is basically a string, which is between the double quotes. Okay, so let's see how does this execute by going to the online compiler. So if I do this, Control V, okay, and let me press F9, and as you can see here, it basically prints hello world. I think it printed this because I pressed something afterwards. Let me press F9 again. Yes. Okay. So it will basically print. Hello world.
Doctor?
Now.
So the double forward slash is like comments?
Yes. Well, this is actually a comment that was that was not really introduced in the ANSI C standard. It was introduced afterwards when C++ was developed, and it has been included in the C compiler. Okay, but the original the original comments are basically the slash star. Starts with a slash star, ends with a star slash. Ends with a star slash. Inshallah, we will talk about that. Right. So the first thing a Python programmer notices is the significant overhead to simply print a string. Instead of 1 line of code in Python, now we have 3 lines of code at least. The hash include works like import in Python. Well, not really, but the analogy works for now. So in this case, the input-output stream library is brought in. The int main begins the declaration of the main function, which in C indicates the first function to be executed. Just like saying, begin here. In Python, main was the start of the program only by convention. Only by convention. The curly braces delimit the beginning and end of blocks of code. In this case, the beginning and end of the main function. Python identifies blocks through indentation. Python identifies blocks through indentation. Right. Now let's come to something that we have not seen earlier. We have not seen in a Python code, which is variable declaration. Variable declaration. Now, so what are variables? Well, the memory cells used for storing a program's input data and its computational result. Now, as a definition, this is exactly the same definition as variables in Python. Okay, as variables in Python. Right. The value of a variable can change at runtime. Again, this is exactly the same as in Python, right? Now we have what we call variable declarations. Now, this is something that does not exist in Python. What are variable declarations? These are statements that communicate to the compiler the names of variables in the program and the type of data they can store. So statements that communicate to the compiler the names of variables and their type. So this is before using them, you need to declare them. Before using them, you need to declare them. For example, you see here double miles KMS. So it's as if you are declaring that I'm declaring two variables, miles and KMS, and these two variables are of type double, which is, by the way, float. Kind of corresponds to float in Python. Here you have count and large. You are declaring two variables, one variable called count, another variable called large, and they are of type integer. Here you are declaring one variable called answer, which is of type character, one character, a single character. This is not a string. CHAR is not a string. Until now, it's not a string. It's only a single character. You are defining it as a single character. So now these are the declarations of the variable. This is how, you know, C identifies the variables. First, you need to declare them, and then you can use them, and then you can assign values, Right. Let me see whether you are with me ولا مع الأسف. In Python, can I change the type of the variable by assigning it to different, you know, values of different types?
Yes.
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 Yes. طيب. Based on this, based on what you have seen here, do you think you can do the same in C?
No.
I don't think.
No.
No. See, once you define it as double, you cannot redefine it. خلاص, it stays as double. As long as, you know, it is in the same scope, خلاص, it will stay as double. If you declare it as integer, it will stay as integer. If you declare it as character, it will stay as character. This is another, you know, very important difference between Python and C.
Doctor?
Now,
For the constant, we use hash define.
yes,
And does it follow the same rule here or another thing?
ايش رايك؟ احنا
don't
ايش
think-
قلنا الهاش ديفاين، قلنا ايش بيصير في الهاش ديفاين؟ Anybody can tell him what happens in the hash define? What did we say about hash define? When I say hash define kilometers per hour and then 1.609 or kilometers per mile, I mean.
The
أيوة.
name is changed with the value before compiling.
Even before compilation. See, before compilation, it will look at your source code and it will do, you know, kind of find and replace. It will, whenever it finds KMS per mile, it will remove it and it will put 1.609. واضح الآن الفرق؟
Yes.
Okay, so it doesn't really hold a value in memory. Okay, it's not, you know, held as a value in memory. So C requires that you declare every variable in the program. You cannot start using a variable before declaring it. You have to declare it before using it. You have to declare it before using it, right? So this is kind of the syntax for declaring variables. So you declare the type, and then you can put one or more, okay? Separated by commas. Finally, by the way, you will see here that the end of each statement is ended by what? By the semicolon. By the semicolon. How did the statements end in Python?
New line.
New line, صح? New line. And if something was inside, body of an if or a for or whatever, it will be indented. But every statement had one line. If you needed to put more than one statement in one line, what did you use?
And
In Python,
Yes, in Python.
you can't. I don't think you can.
لا, I
You have
think
to start a new line. It gets confused. But in C, you can just put semicolon and you can write maybe the entire program in one line.
طيب, try to also use the semicolon in Python and see whether it works or not. Okay, try it. طيب. Okay, so you can see the semicolon here, and as you can see here, int count, comma, and in a new line, large, and then semicolon. This indentation, does not mean anything because indentation does not have, any meaning in C. We only use indentation to, properly read the function, okay, or to properly read the code. So that I know, for example, if this is the body of the if statement, it's better that it is indented. But is it a requirement to be indented? The answer is no. The answer is no.
What's the disadvantage of not having variable declarations in Python?
It will not run as fast because it has to create those. It has to allocate, these variables during runtime. فit has to do a lot of I/O during the execution. Whereas in C, when you define all your variables up front, all this can be allocated in memory before even the program starts.
يعني عشان
it will be faster.
يعني هو يغير الموقع في الميموري ولا الفاريبل؟ بايثون كل شويه ولا؟
بالبايثون مين اللي بيغير الموقع؟
لما نغير تعريفه عشان كذا هو بطيء، يعني ابطا من
بالضبط يعني as I said يعني when you change its when you use another data type, especially if it needs, like for example you used it as an integer, for example, is stored using, let's say, 4 bytes or 8 bytes. Okay, طيب, assume that you use the same variable name with a string with 100 characters. طيب, ال 100 characters, since we are using Unicode, so 2 bytes per character, you need 200 bytes. The program will look for, during runtime, will look for a place, to store this variable. This will take time. واضح؟
اي تمام.
Whereas in C, خلاص, all your declarations, even before the program starts, you can already know, where is each variable. Kind of. يعني, for most of the variables, you will already know where each variable is. Okay. Right. So as you can see here, you can define, double, rate and time, and then int age, or you can have one line for each. So double rate, int age, double time. Okay. So you can even you can define it in one line, or you can split it in more than one line. So in C, all variables must be declared before use, unlike Python. Python figures out types based on the objects you assign names to, but C wants to know upfront. Python allows names to refer to different types of objects while program is running. In the in C language, the type remains fixed. Okay? Right. Now, as far as data types is concerned, well, data types are a set of values and a set of operations that can be performed on these values. For example, int stores signed integer values, whole numbers, for example, 65 or minus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Double stores real numbers that use a decimal point. For example, 3.14159, which is kind of pi, or 1.23E5, which is the same as 1.23 multiplied by 10 to the power 5, right? Which is 1, 2, 3s with 3 zeros. 1, 2, 3 with 3 zeros. So this is 123,000. Okay. So this is some C types are similar, like int, float, and string. Well, float we have double in C. String, well, until now we haven't seen string in C, but inshallah we will see that. We only saw it as something which is defined between the double quotes, right? Which is similar to Python. And of course, the character is different. Okay, the character basically defines a single character. So character represents an individual character value. It could be a letter, a digit, or a special symbol. Any character. It could be any character. Each value of type character is enclosed in single quotes, apostrophe, in single quotes. صح؟ احنا الهلو world شفناها between ايش؟ Between double quotes. That's a string, right? But a character is enclosed with a single quote. So we can have, this could be a proper character value, capital A. Small z is also proper character value. The colon is a proper character value. So the ASCII code is basically a particular code that specifies the integer representing, each character value. Remember in Python when we took the CHR, and then if you give it any, like a digit, it will give you the Unicode, of that, the Unicode of that. And basically the first 128 Unicodes are actually exactly the same as the ASCII code. So if you do CHR space in Python, you will get 32, just like if you do that for, if you try to print, the unsigned value of the character space, it will basically give you 32. Okay, it will basically give you 32. Okay. طيب. Let me see if I can stop here. Just a second. Still, we have maybe kind of 3 minutes. Yeah, I think we can safely stop here. So this is a good place to stop. Input, output operations and functions. Don't say no. I never, made you finish early. طيب. Any questions يا شباب؟
Yes, Doctor.
دكتور
تفضل.
where can I find the recording? You saved it in the Blackboard.
أي ريكوردينج؟
التسجيلات اللي أنت مسجلهم
موجودين كلهم على اليوتيوب وكلهم حدثتهم لغاية آخر محاضرة طلعت امبارح.
بالبلاكبورد ولا باليوتيوب؟
باليوتيوب كلهم موجودين باليوتيوب بالتيمز. You can also access them من المايكروسوفت تيمز.
لا بس باليوتيوب دكتور كيف اطلعهم؟ وش اكتب اذا ما عليك امر؟
روح على اليوتيوب ريكوردينجز في الكومن بلاك بورد. في الكومن بلاك بورد في شيء مكتوب يوتيوب ريكوردينجز او ليكتشر ريكوردينج. اللينكس كلها موجودين هنا.
صفحتي كانت؟
لا بالكومن بلاك بورد.
تمام.
روح على الكومن بلاك بورد. في one of the اللي تحت المنيو هذا اللي على اليسار، واحدة فيهم I think lecture recordings اسمها أو YouTube recordings one of them.
الله يجزاك الخير دكتور.
بتروح هناك وياك بتشوف
جزاك الله خير.
طيب غيره يا شباب.
دكتور بخصوص الكومبايلر، هو الكود اللي حطيته في الكومبايلر حق هلو وورد،
نعم
تقدر تروح له؟
الكود اللي حطيته في الكومبايلر اللي هو هذا تبع الهلو وورلد.
ايه
أيوة.
وش فائدة الصفر، ريتيرن صفر هنا؟
return zero as I said يعني C or as somebody mentioned إنه C is the lowest high level language. Is the lowest high level language. when you say return zero يعني this C code can be called from the shell أو from kind of the command line. When you do CMD هنا مش بيطلع هذه. Okay. Now when you run this, when you say here return zero, you can actually receive the zero. You can get it, and save it, and based on that, you can do things with it. It's just يعني it will return zero, after it finishes. It will return zero after it finishes. فما لها أي شيء. يعني it does not mean anything except إنه it basically returns the value zero. Usually if it returns 1 or 2 or 3, then you need to associate, what does the 1 mean, what does the 2 mean, what does the 3 mean. This is something different.
It's not necessary that we say return zero. We can also, in the int main, we say int main void. If we say void, it means that this function does not return any arguments.
لا مش هنا
No, no, between the curly braces. No.
لا.
Between the curly braces in main.
تحطها هنا.
No, we say int main. And between the curly braces, we say void. After that, we don't need to return zero because it's a special case. So we said this function does not return any argument.
That's not correct. When you put void,
I'm sure I saw it in the book.
لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. استنى علي.
Yeah.
If you put void between the brackets, this means that main does not take any extra arguments.
Yes.
The void, if you put the void before the main, this means
no, we don't put it before.
anything. طب ارجع للكتاب وشوف واحكي لي بعد بكره.
Okay, no problem. Doctor, I sent you a message on Teams detailing some things, improvements for the course for the upcoming semesters. I hope it's helpful.
إن شاء الله. جزاك الله خير.
Thank you.
طيب. Anything else يا شباب؟ خلاص then you can leave.
شيء أخير بس دكتور.
تفضل.
اللي هو